The HOA said my donkeys destroyed $96,000 worth of their property. What they didn't realize was that the word there was about to cost them a whole lot more. The first light came down at 4:47 in the morning. Crack. I woke up before I understood what I'd heard. Then came the metallic bang. Clang. My name is Wade Holloway. I'm 49 years old, and when you've spent most of your life around livestock, you learn the difference between ordinary ranch noise and something going wrong. This was wrong. I pulled on jeans, shoved my feet into work boots, grabbed the flashlight beside the mudroom door, and ran outside. October cold hit me across the face. The eastern pasture was still black except for a row of decorative lights glowing near the fence. That was my first surprise. Those lights hadn't been there 2 days earlier. Then another one moved. Roscoe slammed his shoulder against the black metal pole. It tilted. The fixture flashed wildly across the pasture. June kicked backward. Crash. Glass exploded against the ground. Roscoe. I climbed through the gate. Easy. Easy. Both donkeys were worked up. Ears stiff. Breathing hard. Roscoe paced along the fence, while June kept turning toward the remaining lights. These weren't pets. Roscoe and June worked alongside my cattle as livestock guardians. They were steady animals. Alert, stubborn, territorial when something felt wrong, but not the kind to randomly attack fence posts at 5 in the morning. Another fixture suddenly brightened as Roscoe moved. He jumped sideways. That caught my attention. I aimed my flashlight at the nearest pole. New concrete around the base. Fresh electrical conduit. A small black sensor beneath the lamp. I hadn't installed any of it. By sunrise, 6 poles were down. I photographed every one. The broken glass. The fresh concrete. The wiring. The hoof prints. Then I photographed something else. An orange survey pin 23 feet west of the fence line. I stared at it longer than I stared at the damage. That pin had been there since before I bought Holloway Ranch. At 8:31, tires crunched over my gravel driveway. A silver SUV stopped beside my pickup. The woman who stepped out looked like she'd taken a wrong turn on the way to a corporate board meeting. Pink blazer. White blouse. Black high heels. Cynthia Pembroke, president of Stonegate Ridge HOA. The subdivision sat along the eastern edge of my 640 acres. Big houses, stone entrances, decorative landscaping, and enough neighborhood regulations to make breathing feel like it required written approval. Cynthia walked toward me holding a white envelope. Her heels sank slightly into the gravel. She didn't seem to notice. Mr. Holloway. Cynthia. Her eyes went toward Roscoe and June, then toward the fallen lights. Not surprise. Annoyance. That bothered me. She already knew. She placed the envelope on the hood of my Ford. These damages occurred on association property at approximately 4:45 this morning. I looked at the envelope. Stonegate Ridge Homeowners Association. Property damage assessment. I opened it. My eyes went directly to the number at the bottom. $96,000. I read it again. Is this a joke? 6 commercial decorative fixtures were destroyed by your animals. $96,000? The assessment includes replacement fixtures, electrical repairs, landscaping restoration, contractor mobilization, and emergency administrative costs. Emergency administrative costs. That one almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I looked past her toward the pasture. 6 black poles lay crooked in the morning grass. Roscoe stood behind the fence watching us. Cynthia folded her arms. Payment is due within 30 days. I'm not in your HOA. This isn't an HOA fine. It's a property damage claim. That distinction was smart. Smarter than I expected. I picked up the invoice again. You installed those lights? The association did. And they belong to Stonegate. Obviously. I nodded slowly. Then I walked 20 yards toward the nearest fallen pole. Cynthia followed. Click. Crunch. Click. Crunch. Black heels against gravel and dirt. I stopped beside the orange survey pin. The morning sun had just reached it. Bright orange plastic against brown grass. I pointed down. Cynthia's expression changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. I'd spent 17 years building agricultural fences before taking over this ranch. Fence lines move. Posts get replaced. Neighbors make assumptions. Survey monuments don't care about assumptions. I looked from the pin to the fallen light. Then back at Cynthia. You're billing me $96,000 because my animals damaged your lights. That's correct. I folded the invoice and slipped it into my jacket. Okay. She smiled. For about 2 seconds, She thought she'd won. Then I asked the question that wiped the smile off her face. Who told you those lights were on your land? People hear 640 acres and imagine freedom. Open sky. Long fences. Nobody close enough to complain about the color of your barn. What they don't imagine is how much trouble can fit inside 20 feet of dirt. Holloway Ranch had been in my family for 37 years before I bought it from my Uncle Ray. He was 68, tired of winter mornings, and more interested in fishing than fixing fences. I understood. Before taking over the ranch, I'd spent 17 years building agricultural fencing across 3 counties. Cattle ranches, horse farms, orchards, utility corridors, places where being wrong by 3 feet could turn a $10,000 fence into a very expensive mistake. Uncle Ray handed me the deed at his kitchen table. Keep the west pasture dry, he said. That's your advice? And don't trust anybody who says they know where a boundary is without showing you a survey. I laughed. Later, I stopped laughing. The ranch stretched across rolling pasture, scrub oak, 2 seasonal creeks, and enough fence to keep me busy until retirement. Stonegate Ridge sat against the eastern side. It hadn't always been there. When I was a kid, that land was soybean fields. Then came bulldozers, roads, stone entrance columns, 300 houses with identical mailboxes. The subdivision stopped at what everybody casually called the east fence. That phrase mattered, because a fence is not always a property line. Sometimes it's just where somebody decided livestock should stop. My deed came with an old cylindrical survey case. Inside were plats, field notes, and a faded map showing a 20-foot utility easement near the eastern boundary. The easement allowed access for specified infrastructure. It did not transfer ownership. I knew the difference. Still, I had no reason to fight about it. Stonegate maintained its side. I maintained mine. Roscoe and June mostly ignored the neighborhood. Roscoe was 9, gray with a dark stripe across his shoulders, built like a refrigerator with ears. June was smaller, brown, and smarter than most people who'd ever tried to catch her. I kept them with the cattle because donkeys notice things. Dogs, coyotes, unfamiliar movement. Anything that enters their space without belonging there. They weren't attack animals. They were alarms with hooves. 3 months after I bought the ranch, I met Cynthia Pembroke. I was replacing a brace post near the eastern pasture when a silver SUV stopped along the subdivision road. Cynthia walked toward me wearing a pink blazer, white blouse, and black heels. I remember looking at her shoes. Freshly turned soil and high heels are natural enemies. You're Wade Holloway? That's me. She introduced herself as president of Stonegate Ridge HOA. Then she pointed toward the fence. We're planning improvements along this corridor. What kind? Lighting, landscaping, security enhancements. I leaned against my post driver. Stay inside the easement and we shouldn't have a problem. Her expression changed. Not much. Just enough. Everything east of your fence belongs to Stonegate. I looked at the fence, then at her. That's not what my survey says. She smiled. The association has maintained that land for years. Maintenance. Another word people confuse with ownership. I wiped dirt from my hands. If you're installing anything near the boundary, send me the plans. We have our own property records. Great. Send those too. She never did. Life got busy. Calving season came. A storm took down 60 yards of north fence. The tractor needed a hydraulic pump. Cynthia and her improvements dropped somewhere near the bottom of my list. Then, about 2 weeks before those 6 lights came crashing down, I noticed orange paint near the eastern pasture. Utility markings. A few wooden stakes. Nothing unusual if someone was working inside an easement. 3 days later, fresh tire tracks appeared beyond my fence. Then concrete dust. Then black electrical conduit. I should have stopped and checked it. I didn't. That was my mistake. Because Cynthia had said something during our first conversation that I treated like arrogance. Everything east of your fence belongs to Stonegate. After she handed me that $96,000 bill, I went home, pulled the old survey tube from the closet, and spread the plat across my kitchen table. Roscoe and June hadn't created my problem that morning. They'd just made enough noise for me to finally notice it. I found the eastern boundary. Then the fence. They weren't the same line. I measured the scale twice. The fence sat several feet inside my property. And according to that old plat, Cynthia's brand new lights weren't standing beside Holloway Ranch. They were standing on it. The next morning, Cynthia came back with paperwork. That told me 2 things. First, My question about the property line had bothered her. Second, she already had an answer prepared. I was repairing a gate hinge when her silver SUV rolled down my gravel drive at 9:16. Roscoe lifted his head from the pasture. June barely looked up. Cynthia stepped out wearing another pink blazer, or maybe the same one. White blouse, black heels. This time she carried a leather folder. Mr. Holloway. Cynthia. She walked toward me carefully, choosing every step between the muddy ruts. I thought it would be helpful to resolve yesterday's confusion. My confusion? About the association boundary. She opened the folder and handed me 3 photocopied pages. Across the first one, utility and access easement. I read the date, 21 years old. The document referenced Holloway Ranch's eastern parcel and granted limited access for utility installation and maintenance along a 20-foot corridor. I looked up. This is an easement. Yes, not a deed. Her mouth tightened. The association has maintained this corridor for decades. There's that word again. What word? Maintained. A cold breeze moved across the pasture. Behind Cynthia, one of the damaged light poles leaned sideways in fresh concrete. I tapped the document. An easement gives somebody specific use rights. It doesn't automatically make them the owner. We have the right to improve the corridor. Maybe. Not maybe. I looked down again. Utilities. Drainage access. Maintenance. Nothing on the pages she'd given me said decorative lighting. Nothing said security cameras. Nothing said landscaping. More importantly, nothing told me exactly where those 20 feet started and stopped on the ground. Where's the survey exhibit? Cynthia blinked. The what? The exhibit showing the easement boundaries. It's incorporated into the property records. Then where is it? You're focusing on technicalities. I smiled. Property lines are technicalities right up until somebody sends you a $96,000 bill. She closed the folder harder than necessary. The damaged fixtures are association property. Good. She paused. I could see she didn't like the way I said it. Good. If they're yours, keep saying that. Her eyes narrowed. I walked toward the fence. Cynthia followed. The grass was still wet enough to darken the edges of her heels. I stopped at the nearest orange survey marker. Then I pointed toward the fence several feet east of it. This fence was built for livestock containment. It isn't necessarily the boundary. Our records show otherwise. Then you won't mind if I have it surveyed. That brought the smile back. A confident one. Survey whatever you like. I plan to. She handed me another sheet. The $96,000 assessment had now become a formal demand for reimbursement. $61,000 for replacement fixtures. $18,000 for electrical work. $9,500 for landscaping. $7,500 for emergency administration and site safety. I read the last line twice. $7,500 for administration? Our property manager has spent significant time addressing this. Must be exhausting printing invoices. Cynthia didn't laugh. 30 days, Mr. Holloway. I heard you yesterday. If payment isn't received, the association will pursue recovery. Through what? Counsel, if necessary. I folded the demand and slipped it into my jacket. That afternoon, things escalated. 2 workers arrived along the eastern corridor and planted white signs every 50 yards. Stonegate Ridge, private property. No trespassing. One sign went up beside my cattle trough. Another appeared near a cottonwood tree Uncle Ray and I had used as a lunch spot when I was 12. Then I saw the camera. A new black pole stood beyond the fence, angled directly toward my pasture. Roscoe stood 15 feet from it, ears forward, completely still. I walked closer. The base was fresh. So fresh the concrete still had a pale gray ring around the edge. A motion sensor sat beneath the camera housing. I moved my arm. A small infrared illuminator clicked. Roscoe jerked backward. There it was. Click. A faint flash. Roscoe stamped. I did it again. Click. His ears flattened. Suddenly, the previous morning made more sense. The donkeys hadn't wandered over and decided to destroy 6 random lights. New poles had appeared along territory they'd known for years. Motion sensors activated when the animals approached. Lights snapped on before dawn. Roscoe and June reacted. I pulled out my phone and recorded the sensor activating. Then I photographed the concrete. The pole. The orange marker. The fence. Everything. At 4:08 that afternoon, I called a licensed surveyor named Marcus Bell. How soon can you mark a boundary? What kind of dispute? I looked across the pasture at Cynthia's private property signs standing in my grass. The $96,000 kind. Marcus was quiet for a second. I can be there Thursday. Bring plenty of flags. That evening, Cynthia emailed me one final sentence. The association considers the ownership of all installed fixtures undisputed. I read it twice. Then I saved it in 3 places. Cynthia thought she was strengthening her claim. What she didn't understand was that I wanted her to keep saying exactly that. Marcus Bell arrived Thursday morning with a survey truck, 2 tripods, a GPS receiver, and absolutely no interest in neighborhood politics. That was exactly why I hired him. He stepped out at 7:12, looked across the eastern pasture, then at Cynthia's private property signs. Where's the disputed line? I pointed. Depends who you ask. He smiled. That's why you don't ask. For the next 3 hours, Marcus worked from recorded monuments instead of fences. That distinction mattered. His receiver beeped softly as he moved through the grass. Beep. Pause. Beep. Every confirmed point got an orange flag. I followed 20 feet behind him. The first flag landed west of the livestock fence. So did the second. And the third. My stomach tightened. By 9:40, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The old fence sat several feet inside Holloway Ranch, which meant the strip Cynthia had been calling Stonegate property wasn't on her side simply because it looked that way. Then Marcus reached the first surviving light pole. He checked his screen, measured again, drove an orange flag into the soil. The pole stood on my side. How far? Outside the recorded easement by roughly 11 feet here. I looked down the corridor. More black poles disappeared toward the trees. Check all of them. Marcus did. Not 6. 23. Decorative lights. 3 camera poles. Sections of irrigation line. Landscaping beds. And part of a walking trail Stonegate residents had apparently been using for years. The deeper we went, the quieter I got. At 10:26, a silver SUV appeared. Of course it did. Cynthia crossed the grass in black heels, pink blazer bright against the brown pasture. What is happening? Marcus kept working. I answered. A survey. You were not authorized to survey association property. Marcus finally looked up. Ma'am, I'm working for the owner of this parcel. Her face tightened. That ownership is disputed. Not by the county records I'm using. Silence. Marcus's receiver beeped. A tiny sound. But Cynthia reacted like it was a warning alarm. She turned toward me. The easement permits association improvements. Inside the easement. These installations are inside the maintained corridor. Maintained corridor isn't a legal boundary. Her voice sharpened. You are not an attorney. No. I'm the guy you billed $96,000. Marcus moved to another pole. Beep. Another orange flag went into the ground. Cynthia watched it. For the first time since this started, she looked genuinely nervous. By noon, Marcus had enough field data for a preliminary conclusion. The 20-foot easement existed. Stonegate had legitimate limited rights within it. But multiple installations extended beyond it onto my property, including all 6 damaged lights. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. A survey doesn't erase every legal argument. And I knew enough about property disputes to understand that old agreements can hide surprises. So I called attorney Laura Bennett. She specialized in land use disputes and had represented 2 ranchers I knew. I sent her Cynthia's easement, the $96,000 demand, my deed, Marcus's preliminary measurements. She called 20 minutes later. Don't remove anything. I wasn't planning to. Don't disconnect anything either. Okay. And don't send Cynthia an angry email. That one hurts. Laura laughed. Let them keep talking. That afternoon, Cynthia did exactly that. Her attorney sent a formal letter stating that every lighting fixture, camera assembly, irrigation component, and landscape improvement along the corridor was owned exclusively by Stonegate Ridge HOA. I read that sentence twice, then forwarded it to Laura. Her reply came almost immediately. Perfect. The next morning, I drove to the county planning office. I wasn't looking for the boundary anymore. Marcus had answered that. I wanted to know how 23 light poles, cameras, irrigation lines, and part of a walking trail had ended up outside a 20-foot easement without anyone noticing. The permit clerk pulled the old project files. The first application was 6 years old. Stonegate Ridge Corridor Beautification Project. I turned the page. Applicant, Stonegate Ridge HOA. Then I saw the parcel number. Mine. Holloway Ranch. My skin went cold. Under property owner, someone had typed, Stonegate Ridge Homeowners Association. That wasn't a survey mistake. That was a representation. I kept reading. 3 folders later, I found a boundary inquiry dated 3 years earlier. Requested by Cynthia Pembroke. Attached was the county's written response describing the 20-foot easement and warning that improvements beyond it could require permission from the underlying landowner. At the bottom was an acknowledgement. Cynthia's signature. I sat there beneath the fluorescent lights listening to the air conditioner hum. She knew. Before the lights. Before the cameras. Before the $96,000 bill. Cynthia knew the easement had limits. And she had just put in writing that every fixture outside those limits belonged to her HOA. The smartest thing Laura Bennett told me was also the hardest thing to do. Don't stop her. I was sitting across from her desk the morning after I found Cynthia's signature on that county boundary inquiry. Rain tapped against the office window. Laura had my deed open beside Marcus Bell's preliminary survey, Cynthia's $96,000 demand, the easement, and copies of the permit applications. You're telling me she knew those installations could be outside the easement. I'm telling you she received written notice 3 years ago explaining exactly where that easement ended. And then listed Stonegate as the property owner on permits using my parcel number. Laura nodded. That's what the records show. So we send everything to her attorney. No, I stared at her. No, not yet. She picked up Cynthia's latest letter. Every fixture, camera assembly, irrigation component, and landscape improvement along the corridor was owned exclusively by Stonegate Ridge HOA. Laura tapped the sentence. This is useful. She's threatening me. She's identifying her property. On my land. Exactly. That was when I understood. Cynthia had spent days trying to make the $96,000 claim stronger. Every time she did, she tied Stonegate more tightly to the installations Marcus had found beyond the easement. So I went home and waited. Friday brought another email. Final notice of intent to pursue damages. I saved it. Monday brought photographs of Roscoe and June beside the fallen lights. I saved those too. Tuesday, Stonegate's management company sent a demand stating that the damaged fixtures formed part of the HOA's privately owned security and beautification infrastructure. Saved. I created a folder on my computer. Stonegate claims. Then another. Survey. Then another. County records. I backed everything up twice. Cynthia thought silence meant fear. By Wednesday, she got bolder. 2 contractors arrived to inspect the damaged poles. I met them at the gate. You working for Stonegate? One nodded. We're replacing the fixtures. Not today. He showed me a work order. I photographed it. Property owner, Stonegate Ridge HOA. There it was again. I called Laura. Can I stop them? Yes. Politely. They don't have permission to perform new work outside the easement while ownership and access are disputed. So I did. No shouting. No tractor blocking the road. No dramatic confrontation. I simply handed the foreman Laura's letter. He read it, looked at the orange survey flags, then loaded his tools back into the truck. Cynthia arrived 15 minutes later. Pink blazer, white blouse, black heels sinking into damp soil. You're interfering with emergency repairs. I'm preventing construction on disputed land. There is no dispute. I almost smiled. Then why are there survey flags? Her eyes moved toward them. 23 orange markers stretched through the grass like a dotted warning line. You're trying to manufacture a technicality. 11 feet is a pretty big technicality when you're pouring concrete. She stepped closer. Those lights belong to Stonegate. I let the silence sit. Then I asked, all 23? Yes. The cameras too? Yes. Irrigation. Everything installed by this association belongs to this association. I nodded. Okay. Her expression shifted. She expected an argument. I gave her agreement. That made her nervous. You'll hear from our attorney. I'm counting on it. That evening, Marcus delivered the certified survey. I spread it across my kitchen table. Red boundary line. Yellow easement corridor. Black symbols marking HOA installations. The picture was cleaner than any argument I could make. 6 damaged lights outside the easement. 17 additional lights crossing beyond it at various points. 3 camera installations. Irrigation. Part of the walking trail. Roscoe wandered past the kitchen window while I studied it. June followed behind him. They had no idea they were at the center of a $96,000 property dispute. Probably better that way. The next morning, Laura called. Stonegate scheduled an emergency membership meeting. When? Tuesday night. About me? About the damage assessment and what they're calling a threat to community infrastructure. I looked at the survey. Can I attend? You own adjoining property and they intend to discuss claims against you. I've requested time for us to respond. Did they agree? A pause. Cynthia did. That surprised me. Why? She thinks she has the room. I understood immediately. Cynthia wanted homeowners angry before I arrived. Pictures of broken lights. Pictures of donkeys. A rancher refusing to pay. Simple story. Except I wasn't bringing a story. I was bringing documents. Before hanging up, Laura said, "One more thing." What? Bring the original $96,000 invoice. I looked toward the folder on my counter. Why? Because Cynthia did something very helpful when she sent it. What? She put a price on property she repeatedly claims belongs to Stonegate. Tuesday afternoon, I slid the certified survey into Uncle Ray's old survey tube. Then I put Cynthia's invoice beside it. For the first time since those lights came down, I wasn't angry. I was curious. Cynthia had spent 2 weeks insisting the fixtures were hers. That night, in front of her own homeowners, I was finally going to let her prove it. By 6:40 Tuesday evening, Cynthia had already put Roscoe's face on a 12-foot screen. Not his best picture either. He was caught mid-bray beside one of the fallen light poles, ears straight up, mouth open, broken glass scattered through the grass. Underneath the photograph, Cynthia had added 3 words in red: dangerous livestock damage. I stood at the back of the Stonegate Ridge clubhouse holding Uncle Ray's old survey tube. Laura Bennett stood beside me. "That's subtle," I whispered. "Let her talk." Nearly 100 homeowners filled the folding chairs. Cynthia sat at the front table in her pink blazer and white blouse, flanked by 2 board members and the property manager. At exactly 7, she tapped the microphone. The speakers squealed. Then she began. She talked about safety, community investment, property values. She described the destroyed lights as critical security infrastructure. Then she displayed the invoice. $96,000. A murmur moved through the room. Cynthia looked directly at me. "The owner of Holloway Ranch has refused reimbursement despite clear evidence that his animals destroyed association-owned property." There it was again. Association-owned. Laura wrote something on her pad. Cynthia kept going. She showed photographs of June, the damaged fixtures, the camera poles, then a map. It was colorful, professional, and wrong. The map treated my livestock fence as the property boundary. When Cynthia finished, several homeowners were visibly angry. One man near the front raised his hand. "Why should our dues pay for somebody else's animals?" Cynthia nodded solemnly. "That is precisely why the board intends to pursue full recovery." Laura leaned toward me. "Ready?" I stood. The room quieted. Cynthia smiled. "Mr. Holloway, you'll have 5 minutes." "I won't need 5. I carried the survey tube to the front. The old cardboard cap made a hollow pop when I pulled it free. Then I unrolled Marcus Bell's certified survey across the table. Cynthia's smile disappeared. Laura connected her laptop to the projector. The first image appeared. My deed. The second, the recorded 20-foot easement. The third was Marcus's survey. Red line, property boundary. Yellow strip, easement. Black dots, Stonegate installations. 23 of them. The room became very quiet. I pointed to the livestock fence. "This is the fence Cynthia used as the boundary on her map." Then I pointed to the red line. "This is the surveyed property boundary." Someone in the audience said, "Those aren't the same." No, I highlighted the 6 damaged lights. All 6 were installed outside the recorded easement and inside Holloway Ranch. Cynthia reached for her microphone. "That interpretation is disputed." Laura stepped forward. "The survey was prepared by a licensed surveyor using recorded monuments and county records." Next slide. Stonegate's permit application. Parcel number, Holloway Ranch. Property owner listed, Stonegate Ridge HOA. People started whispering. Next slide. The county boundary inquiry. Cynthia Pembroke. 3 years earlier. Then the county response warning that improvements outside the 20-foot easement could require the landowner's permission. Finally, Cynthia's signed acknowledgement. The whispering stopped. A woman in the second row turned toward Cynthia. "You knew?" Cynthia's face tightened. "That correspondence has been taken out of context." I didn't argue. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the original $96,000 invoice. and placed it beneath the document camera. The number filled the screen. $96,000. Cynthia says my donkeys damaged Stonegate property. I looked toward her. Correct. Her attorney wasn't there. I think that mattered. Cynthia lifted her chin. Yes. And Stonegate owns these lights. Yes. All the fixtures installed as part of the corridor project? Yes. Laura glanced at me. There it was. I clicked the next slide. 23 black dots appeared beyond the yellow easement at different locations. Lights, cameras, irrigation equipment, sections of landscaping infrastructure, part of the walking trail. I let everyone look at it. Thank you. Cynthia frowned. For what? For putting ownership in writing. Nobody moved. I pointed toward the red boundary line. You bill me $96,000 because you say those fixtures belong to Stonegate. Pause. Your own permit applications say they belong to Stonegate. Another pause. And tonight, in front of your homeowners, you just said it again. Cynthia stared at me. I tapped the map. The problem is that Stonegate's property is sitting on mine. The room erupted. Questions came from everywhere. Who approved construction? Why was the ranch parcel number used? How much HOA money had been spent? Why hadn't homeowners been told about the boundary warning? Cynthia kept tapping her microphone. Order. Please. Order. Nobody listened. Laura slid one final letter across the table toward the board. It requested withdrawal of the damage claim, suspension of further work, and formal negotiations over the unauthorized installations. I looked at Cynthia. 2 weeks earlier, she had walked onto my ranch believing a $96,000 invoice would scare me into paying. Instead, she had done something far more valuable. She had documented exactly who owned every piece of infrastructure we had just proven was standing outside her easement. Roscoe and June had knocked down 6 lights. Cynthia had just knocked down her own case. The meeting ended at 9:18, but Stonegate's real problem started at 9:19. People didn't leave. They gathered in the clubhouse parking lot under the decorative lamps Cynthia had spent the last hour defending. Homeowners stood in small circles holding phones, taking pictures of Marcus Bell's survey on the screen through the windows. I heard the same question over and over. How much did we spend? Cynthia came through the clubhouse doors 10 minutes later. Pink blazer, white blouse, black heels. Her property manager followed close behind. She saw me beside my truck. You embarrassed this community tonight. I closed the survey tube. No. I showed them a map. You presented incomplete information. Then complete it. Her eyes hardened. The association has legal rights along that corridor. I never said it didn't. You implied we were trespassing. I showed 23 installations outside a 20-foot easement. That survey is one interpretation. Survey monuments don't interpret. She stepped closer. You think this is over? No. I looked back toward the clubhouse. I think it just stopped being about $96,000. That part turned out to be true. By Thursday, Laura received a letter from Stonegate's new outside counsel. The tone was different. No threats. No 30-day deadline. No language about immediate collection. Instead, request for temporary standstill and property review. Laura called me. That's lawyer language for nobody touch anything while we figure out how bad this is. So the bill is gone. Not yet. I leaned against my kitchen counter. Then I'm still not impressed. Patience, Wade. I hated when she said that. The following week, Stonegate hired its own surveyor. Good. I wanted them to. Their crew spent 2 days along the eastern corridor. Roscoe followed them from behind the fence like a suspicious supervisor. June ignored everyone until one surveyor opened a bag of potato chips. 3 days later, Stonegate's attorney called Laura. Their surveys substantially agreed with Marcus. Not every measurement was identical. Surveys rarely work that way. But the important part was, multiple Stonegate installations extended beyond the easement onto Holloway Ranch. The 6 damaged lights were among them. The $96,000 demand was formally withdrawn that afternoon. I printed the email, then taped it to the refrigerator. Uncle Ray came over for coffee the next morning. He read it. 96 grand to 0. Pretty good discount. He grunted. Don't get excited. They still got 23 poles on your dirt. He was right. The invoice had only been the spark. Now we had to deal with the fire. Laura sent Stonegate a proposed resolution. Remove infrastructure outside the easement. Restore disturbed ground. Relocate the walking trail. Correct inaccurate permit records. Or negotiate a written land use agreement for anything Stonegate wanted to keep. No threats. No ridiculous million-dollar demand. Just boundaries. Cynthia hated that more than a lawsuit. At the next board meeting, 47 homeowners showed up. Then 63. Then 81. People started requesting financial records. How much had the corridor project cost? Who approved it? Why had Stonegate listed itself as property owner on permits involving my parcel? And why had Cynthia never disclosed the county's earlier warning? The answer to that last question changed everything. One board member, Daniel Price, requested the internal project files. Buried inside was an email Cynthia had sent 3 years earlier after receiving the county response. Her message was short: proceed with planned improvements. Existing fence line has historically functioned as practical boundary. Practical boundary. I read those words in Laura's office. She knew the legal boundary might be different. Laura nodded and chose the fence because it was convenient. That email circulated among the board within hours. By Friday evening, Stonegate announced a special board session. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. At 8:36, Daniel Price called me. Cynthia is no longer president. I looked out my kitchen window. Roscoe and June were standing beneath the cottonwood tree. What happened? The board voted to remove her from the officer position pending an internal review. Not from the neighborhood. Not dragged away in handcuffs. No movie ending. Just consequences. The kind that come from signatures, emails, surveys, and homeowners realizing their money had been spent based on assumptions nobody bothered to verify. A month later, crews arrived at the eastern corridor. This time, they had permission. The 6 damaged lights were removed first. Then the remaining fixtures outside the easement were marked for relocation. I stood beside Marcus's orange survey pin while a worker lifted one black pole from the ground. Concrete cracked around its base. Crunch. Roscoe watched from 20 yards away. Calm. No stamping. No flattened ears. No flashing sensor aimed into his pasture. The worker looked at him. That the famous donkey? Unfortunately, he really caused all this. I looked at the orange boundary flag moving in the wind. No, then I looked toward Stonegate. He just made enough noise for everybody to notice. The first thing Stonegate moved wasn't a light pole. It was the walking trail. 2 weeks after Cynthia lost the presidency, I woke to the low growl of a compact excavator working along the eastern pasture. By 7, a crew was peeling gravel away from the section that crossed beyond the easement. No shouting. No security guards. No pink blazer. Just workers following a corrected survey. Funny how quiet things get when everybody finally knows where the line is. Laura negotiated the settlement over the next month. Stonegate formally withdrew the $96,000 damage claim. In return, I agreed not to pursue separate claims over the 6 broken fixtures while the remaining encroachments were corrected. The HOA paid for Marcus Bell's survey. They paid to restore disturbed portions of the pasture. They relocated the cameras, moved the irrigation, shifted the walking trail. Some lighting remained where it properly fit inside the recorded easement. Everything else had to move or be covered by a written agreement. That mattered to me. I wasn't trying to punish 300 homeowners for decisions most of them never knew had been made. They hadn't poured the concrete. They hadn't filled out the permits. They hadn't sent me the bill. Most of them had simply believed the same thing Cynthia kept repeating. The fence was the boundary. It wasn't. One Saturday morning, Daniel Price drove out to the ranch. He had been elected Stonegate's new president after the board reorganized. No suit. No leather folder. Just jeans, work boots, and 2 cups of coffee. Already an improvement. He handed me one. Peace offering. I took it. Depends what's in it. Coffee. No easements. He laughed. We walked toward the eastern pasture. Crews had already removed 14 poles. Concrete scars dotted the grass where the bases had been. Roscoe wandered over. Daniel stopped. That him. That's Roscoe. The $96,000 donkey. Don't say that where he can hear you. He'll want royalties. Roscoe sniffed Daniel's sleeve, then lost interest. Daniel looked toward the orange survey flags. You know what bothers me most? What? We had the county letter. I didn't answer. He continued. We had Cynthia's email. We had enough information to ask questions years ago. But nobody did. No. Wind moved through the dry grass. One of the remaining Stonegate lights stood beyond the easement, waiting for Monday's crew. Daniel shook his head. People trusted the map they were shown. That happens. You don't sound angry. I was. I took a drink of coffee. Anger's useful for about 10 minutes. After that, paperwork works better. By December, the corridor looked different. Cleaner. Less crowded. Most importantly, correct. Marcus returned after the relocation work and verified the new placements. I walked the line with him. Every few hundred feet, we checked a monument or marker. Beep. Orange flag. Beep. Orange flag. That sound had become strangely satisfying. At the place where the 6 lights had fallen, there was nothing now but repaired grass. No concrete. No wiring. No motion sensors. Roscoe and June grazed nearby without paying attention. That was probably the strongest evidence I had that the problem had never really been the animals. The problem had been putting unfamiliar equipment where livestock had spent years expecting open pasture. The HOA had treated the fence like a property line, then treated its assumption like permission, then treated its construction like ownership, then sent me a bill when reality objected. A week before Christmas, I received Stonegate's final settlement packet. Laura had already reviewed it. I signed the acknowledgement at my kitchen table. Beside my hand sat the original $96,000 invoice. I had kept it, not because I needed it anymore, because I liked what it represented. Cynthia had meant that document to scare me. Instead, it became the cleanest statement in the entire dispute. These fixtures belonged to Stonegate Ridge HOA. Her claim, her words, her price. I slid the invoice into Uncle Ray's old survey tube with the certified plat. Then I carried it back to the closet. Outside, evening settled over Holloway Ranch. The new Stonegate lights came on one by one. Warm, steady, quiet. And for the first time, everyone I could see was standing where it actually belonged. Roscoe lifted his head, looked toward them, then went right back to eating. 6 months after Roscoe knocked down the first light, I replaced the eastern fence. Not because Cynthia had been right about it, because Uncle Ray had been right about something else. A fence should never invite an argument about where the land ends. Marcus Bell came back one last time and marked the surveyed boundary. I hired a crew I'd worked with years earlier, and we rebuilt the livestock fence where it made sense while preserving the recorded easement. Steel posts, fresh wire, proper setbacks, no assumptions. I drove the final brace post myself. Thunk. The hydraulic driver lifted. Thunk. Roscoe watched from 30 yards away, chewing hay like a supervisor disappointed with my progress. June stood beside him. "You two have caused enough trouble," I told them. June flicked an ear. Fair response. Across the boundary, Stonegate looked different too. The walking trail curved away from my pasture. The relocated cameras faced Stonegate property. The irrigation line had been corrected, and the decorative lights stood where the final agreement allowed them to stand. At dusk, they came on one by one. Click. Warm pools of light appeared along the trail. Roscoe looked up. Nothing flashed into his pasture. No sudden sensor snapped on beside him. He stared for 3 seconds, then went back to eating. That made me smile. Cynthia never came back to the ranch. I saw her once about 4 months after the settlement. I was filling my truck at a gas station outside town when a silver SUV pulled up on the opposite side of the pumps. She stepped out. Pink blazer, white blouse, black heels. For a second, neither of us said anything. The pump beside me clicked. She looked older, or maybe just tired. "Mr. Holloway." "Cynthia." Her eyes moved toward my truck. "I understand the relocation work is complete." "It is." The association spent a considerable amount correcting that corridor. I put the nozzle back into the pump. Probably would have been cheaper to check the survey first. Her jaw tightened. The old Cynthia appeared for half a second, then disappeared. She got back into her SUV without another word. I watched her drive away. No victory speech. No applause. I didn't need either. The best part of winning a property dispute is getting your property back. That spring, grass grew over the scars where the misplaced concrete bases had been removed. You could barely tell 23 installations had ever crossed the line. The orange survey pin remained. I kept that visible, not because I expected another fight, because I'd learned what happens when people stop looking. The original $96,000 invoice stayed inside Uncle Ray's survey tube. Every once in a while, somebody heard the story and asked why I hadn't thrown it away. Because that invoice was the entire case in one piece of paper. Cynthia had accused my animals of destroying Stonegate property. She had listed the replacement cost. She had demanded reimbursement. Then her attorney had repeatedly confirmed that the lights, cameras, irrigation equipment, and landscaping belonged exclusively to the HOA. She thought those words trapped me. They didn't. They trapped the claim to the equipment. Once Marcus proved where that equipment was standing, Cynthia's strongest argument became mine. That was the part people usually missed. Roscoe and June didn't beat an HOA. I didn't beat one either. The homeowners weren't my enemies. Most of them wanted the same thing I did. Clear rules. Accurate records. People in charge who understood the difference between authority and ownership. What ended Cynthia's presidency wasn't one angry rancher. It was her own paperwork meeting a survey she couldn't talk over. One evening, Uncle Ray sat with me on the porch while the sun dropped behind the western pasture. Far across the ranch, Stonegate's lights began glowing. He nodded toward the east. Looks better. Yeah. Donkeys still hate them? I looked at Roscoe and June grazing quietly near the new fence. Nope. Ray took a sip of coffee. So what did you learn? I thought about Cynthia standing beside my pickup that first morning. Pink blazer. Black heels. A white envelope on the hood. $96,000. I remembered the confidence in her voice when she said those lights belonged to Stonegate. Then I remembered the orange flags. The county letter. Her signature. The silence in that clubhouse when the real boundary appeared on the screen. I leaned back. Never argue with somebody who's determined to put the wrong thing in writing. Ray laughed. The evening went quiet again. Roscoe lifted his head as the last light came on beyond the fence. This time, it was exactly where it belonged. Cynthia billed me $96,000 because my donkeys smashed her HOA's lights. In the end, I never paid a cent. The lights moved. The boundary stayed. And the most expensive mistake Cynthia ever made wasn't putting those fixtures on my land. It was sending me a bill proving they were hers.